I'll never forget that Wednesday evening. It wasn't a particularly special day, just another weekday where I'd come home expecting the usual quiet chaos of our lives. Dinner with Sandra, a little conversation, and maybe a peaceful evening before bed. But life had other plans. When I stepped out of my car and saw that brightly colored monstrosity of a sports car parked a few doors down, my instincts told me something wasn't right. It wasn't the kind of car anyone in our neighborhood drove, not unless they were flaunting money or, apparently, something worse. And there she was, my wife, Sandra, stepping out of that car. A car that didn't belong to me, or anyone she should have been with. She was wearing that red dress I'd bought for her, the one she knew made her look stunning. I told her it was my favorite. And here she was, sliding out of that car while the driver, some cocky fool I vaguely recognized, held the door open for her like she was royalty. For a split second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe it wasn't Sandra. But no, it was her. And the way she smiled, nodded, and walked towards our house. It hit me like a truck. I didn't move. I couldn't. It was like the ground had swallowed me whole. I stood frozen, watching as she passed the line of neighbors getting ice cream, her head high, as if she didn't care. No, it wasn't just that she didn't care. She looked pleased with herself. A smug smile plastered on her face, as if she didn't notice the stares or the whispers that were bound to follow. Then the cameras came out. Phones raised. Neighbors pretending to take casual videos of their kids, but we all knew they weren't. It wasn't until I saw her knock on our front door that my mind snapped back into focus. She didn't even have her keys. She was knocking as though this wasn't her home, as though she was a guest coming back from some excursion. I didn't open the door. I sat in the living room, gripping the arm of the chair so hard I thought it might break. My heart was pounding in my chest, my head racing through 1,000 questions. Why wasn't she opening the door with her keys? Why was she in another man's car? And most importantly, why did she seem so utterly unbothered by it all? When I heard the back door creak open, I knew she'd let herself in another way. My gut twisted as her heels clicked against the tile floor, each step closer to where I was sitting. Then her voice broke the silence. "I'm sorry, honey. It was a mistake." A mistake? Mistake didn't even begin to cover it. Mistake was forgetting to pick up milk from the store. Mistake was leaving the laundry in the washer overnight. What she'd done? There wasn't a word in the dictionary for it. I looked at her, and all I could see was that red dress and the image of her stepping out of that car. That smug smile replayed in my mind like a broken record, taunting me, mocking me. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I got up and walked away. I left her standing there, probably still in that dress, with her mistake hanging in the air. I didn't know what else to do. What do you do when the person you've trusted with everything, your heart, your life, your family, throws it all away in one night? That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the house, replaying every moment I'd ever doubted her. Every time she'd been late at work or out with friends. Were there other nights like this one? Other brightly colored cars and smug smiles I'd missed? Every sound in the house felt amplified. Every creak of the floorboards a reminder that Sandra was still here while my trust in her was miles away, shattered beyond repair. By the time the sun rose, I'd made 2 decisions. 1. I wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. And 2. I needed coffee because this was going to be one hell of a fight. When Sandra suggested therapy, I laughed. Not a genuine, joyful laugh, but one of those cold, hollow laughs that comes from disbelief. Therapy? As if talking to some stranger about her betrayal was going to magically erase what she did. Still, I agreed to it. Not because I thought it would help. Oh no, I was certain it wouldn't. But because I wanted to hear her squirm, to hear her admit to her mistake over and over again. The first session was as awkward as you'd expect. The consultant, Dr. John Williams, tried to act all calm and collected, but I could tell he wasn't ready for what I was about to unload. Sandra sat across from me, her hands clasped in her lap, her face a mix of guilt and hope. She looked fragile, like she was trying to piece herself back together after smashing our lives to bits. But I wasn't in the mood to play the forgiving husband. Dr. Williams started with a warm smile. "Why don't we begin by talking about how we're feeling? how we're feeling. That was a joke, right? I didn't say anything at first, so Sandra jumped in, her voice soft and trembling. I know I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I'm so sorry, Dave. I want to make things right. That was her opening line. The same sorry I'd been hearing since that Sunday afternoon when she waltzed back into the house. It wasn't new, and it certainly wasn't enough. I turned to Dr. Williams, and in the driest tone I could muster, I said, "How do I feel? Humiliated, betrayed, angry. Take your pick." He nodded, as if he'd just solved a riddle. Those are valid feelings, Dave. But the goal here is to work through them. Work through them? I leaned forward, my voice rising. How am I supposed to work through watching my wife walk away with another man, in front of our neighbors, no less? How am I supposed to work through the videos and whispers that followed me everywhere after she came back? Tell me, doctor, how do you work through being humiliated by the person you trusted most? Sandra flinched at my words. Good. She needed to feel every bit of the pain she'd caused me. But then she did something I didn't expect. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, and said, "I didn't think about how it would hurt you, Dave. I was selfish, and I'm so ashamed. I don't know how to fix this, but I'll do whatever it takes." Dr. Williams jumped in before I could respond. "Dave, it's important to recognize that Sandra is taking accountability for her actions. That's a step forward." "Is it?" I snapped. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like too little, too late. The session continued like that, me venting my anger, Sandra apologizing, and Dr. Williams playing referee. He asked questions about our marriage before the incident, about what we wanted moving forward. But every time Sandra spoke about fixing things or moving forward, it felt like a slap in the face. Fixing things? The damage was done. Moving forward? I wasn't even sure I wanted to stay in the same house, let alone move forward. At one point, Dr. Williams asked me what I needed from Sandra to even consider rebuilding our relationship. I laughed again, that same hollow laugh. I need to trust her. But how do you rebuild trust when it's been obliterated? When every time I look at her, all I see is that damn red dress and that smug smile? Sandra sobbed quietly, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to spare her feelings. I was here to air out the mess she'd made of our lives. And if that meant being brutally honest, so be it. When the session ended, Dr. Williams gave us some homework, exercises to help us communicate better. I ignored it. The only communication I was interested in was letting Sandra know just how deep the damage went. As we walked to the car, Sandra reached for my hand. For a split second, I almost let her take it, but then I remembered why we were here, and I pulled away. Her face crumpled, but she didn't say a word. The drive home was silent, except for one thought running through my mind. This wasn't about fixing things. This was about surviving. And for now, that was all I could do. After that first therapy session, I decided to make my stance crystal clear. Forgiveness? No. Reconciliation? A long shot. My priority was survival, for myself and for the kids. Anything else was secondary. The moment we got home, I walked straight upstairs, leaving Sandra standing in the living room like a child caught stealing candy. If she expected a heartfelt talk or some moment of reconnection, she was in for a rude awakening. That night, we slept in the same bed. Not because I wanted to, but because there were no other options. I hated it. Every time she moved, I tensed up. Every time her hand brushed against me, I felt like I was suffocating. And when she tried to scoot closer in her sleep, maybe out of habit, maybe out of guilt, I got up and went to the couch. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I made another decision. I would not pretend things were fine for her comfort. She'd burned that bridge, and it was going to take more than a few tears to rebuild it. The days after were mechanical. We spoke only when necessary, and even that was rare. Questions like, "Where's Sean's homework?" or "What's for dinner?" were answered in the shortest sentences possible. Anything beyond logistics was off limits. If the kids were around, I'd force myself to keep things civil, but the moment they left the room, silence would return like an old friend. Sandra, to her credit, tried. She'd linger in doorways, hoping I'd say something. She'd sit next to me on the couch, inching closer, as if proximity could dissolve the tension. Once, She even made my favorite meal, jollof rice with grilled chicken and fried plantains. The smell was intoxicating, but I barely touched it. She watched me from across the table, her eyes brimming with hope. I let her sit in that silence, let her stew in the consequences of her actions. I wasn't cruel for the sake of it. At least that's what I told myself. This wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself. Every time she tried to bridge the gap, I felt that familiar rage bubbling up inside me, threatening to boil over. So, I stayed distant, detached, safe. But safety has its costs. The kids noticed. How could they not? Sean, our oldest, started asking questions. Why doesn't Dad talk to Mom anymore? Did you guys have a fight? I'd deflect with vague answers, but kids are smarter than we give them credit for. One night, after dinner, he looked at me and said, "You should apologize to Mom." She looked sad. The innocence of it nearly broke me. Apologize? To her? If only he knew. Carrie, our youngest, had a different reaction. She became clingy, always asking me to read her stories or play games. At first, I thought she was just being sweet, but then I realized she was afraid. Afraid that this cold, distant version of me might one day disappear too. That realization cut deeper than I expected. Even with the kids, I wasn't the father I used to be. I tried to fake normalcy for their sake, but the anger was always there, lurking beneath the surface. I couldn't laugh at their jokes the way I used to. I couldn't focus during family movie nights. All I could think about was that Sunday afternoon, that red dress, and the smug smile on her face as she walked up to our house. At night, the bed felt like a battlefield. If Sandra so much as turned toward me, I'd get up and leave. I started wearing pajamas, not for comfort, but as armor. A barrier. I wanted her to know there was no intimacy here, no room for forgiveness. Not yet. And then there were the moments of weakness. Late at night, when the house was silent, I'd catch myself looking at her while she slept. She looked so peaceful, so vulnerable. Part of me wanted to shake her awake and demand answers. Another part wanted to pull her close and feel the comfort we used to share. But I did neither. Instead, I'd slip out of the room and head to the garage, where the punching bag waited. It became my sanctuary. With every punch, I tried to beat the anger out of my system. It didn't work, but it kept me occupied. This was our new normal. A house filled with words unsaid, love unspoken, and wounds unhealed. I wasn't sure how long we could keep it up. But one thing was certain. Sandra was going to have to work harder than ever if she wanted even a sliver of my trust back. If I thought Sandra's betrayal was the worst of it, I was sorely mistaken. What came next was something I hadn't anticipated. The court of public opinion. People love a scandal, and ours was tailor-made for gossip. From the moment Sandra stepped out of that flashy sports car in her red dress, it was as though the entire neighborhood had been handed front-row tickets to the Dave and Sandra tragedy. It started subtly at first. I'd catch neighbors glancing at me through their curtains as I walked to my car. Conversations would stop abruptly when I entered a room. At work, the guys acted differently too. The usual camaraderie was gone, replaced by awkward silences and side eyes. One coworker, Fred Smith, even left a note on my desk. "Cheer up, Dave. Plenty of fish in the sea." That note earned him 2 weeks suspension after I politely reminded him of professional boundaries with my fist. But the real humiliation came from the videos. Oh yes, the videos. I didn't realize it at the time, but someone had recorded Sandra's walk of shame from that car to our house. It made the rounds on social media, complete with captions like, "When you catch her coming home at 1 p.m., and wifey belongs to the streets." Seeing the comments under those posts was like pouring salt into an open wound. Then there was the ice cream truck incident. I couldn't go outside without someone yelling, "Hey, cuckold, how's the missus?" One kid even mimicked Sandra's walk from the video, complete with an exaggerated sway of his hips. His parents stood there, laughing, while I clenched my fists and reminded myself that decking a teenager wouldn't solve my problems. The worst part? Sandra seemed oblivious. Or maybe she wasn't. Maybe she was just better at hiding her shame. She'd still go out, running errands or picking up the kids, as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I couldn't step foot outside without feeling like I had a target painted on my back. I started running at night, just to avoid the stares and whispers. Even then, I'd hear faint shouts from passing cars, "Cheater's husband," or "How's that red dress treating you?" The weight of it all was unbearable. I couldn't escape it. Not at home, not at work, not even at the grocery store. I'd catch snippets of conversations in the checkout line. "Did you hear about Dave's wife? Can you believe she'd do that?" They didn't even bother whispering anymore. The kids weren't spared either. Sean got into a fight at school after another student called his mother a name I won't repeat. When I got the call from the principal, I didn't even know what to say. How could I scold my son for defending his mother when, deep down, I wanted to do the same for myself? Carrie, sweet little Carrie, started drawing pictures of our family. And everyone, she drew me with a sad face. When I asked her why, she said, "Because you don't smile anymore, Daddy." That one hit me harder than any insult hurled from a neighbor's mouth. Sandra tried to fix things in her own way. One day, she walked into the living room and said, "Dave, I want to apologize to the neighbors. I think it'll help." I laughed in disbelief. Help? The neighbors didn't want an apology. They wanted entertainment, and Sandra had given them plenty. But she insisted. What followed was both the most humiliating and strangely cathartic moment of our ordeal. Sandra, dressed in a plain t-shirt and jeans, went door to door, apologizing to every neighbor who would listen. Some slammed the door in her face. Others let her speak, then told her where she could shove her apology. By the time she got to the ice cream truck man's house, she was visibly shaking. He didn't even open the door. He just shouted, "Too late, lady. The whole street knows." When she came home, her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked at me and said, "I tried, Dave. I really tried." For a moment, I felt something close to pity. But then I remembered the smug smile on her face that Sunday afternoon, and the pity evaporated. This was our life now, a public spectacle for anyone with an internet connection or a window facing the street. Sandra's shame was on display, but so was mine. And no amount of apologies or door-knocking was going to change that. I wasn't just the husband of a cheater. I was the man who stayed, and in the eyes of the world, that made me weak. But they didn't know the full story. They didn't know about the kids or the plans I'd started to make. Let them talk. Let them mock. If Sandra wanted to crawl through the mud to make amends, I'd let her. Maybe, just maybe, one day I'd find a way to stand tall again. Revenge wasn't something I planned overnight. It wasn't some heat-of-the-moment, red-hot rage. No, this was different. This was a slow burn, a methodical, calculated need to take back the dignity that had been stripped from me. Sandra's betrayal hurt, yes. But what hurt even more was the smug face of Zionville, the man who thought he could waltz into my life, take what wasn't his, and leave me with the ashes. The more I thought about him, the angrier I got. Zionville wasn't just some random fling. He was a predator, a man who sought out women like Sandra, wives of men he thought were too weak, too powerless to fight back. And me? I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make him regret ever laying eyes on my wife. It started with research. Late at night, while Sandra slept upstairs, I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, scouring the internet for every scrap of information I could find on Zionville. His social media was a goldmine. Pictures of him with his flashy cars, his teammates, his fans. Every post reeked of arrogance. But it wasn't the photos that interested me, it was the comments. Women throwing themselves at him, men idolizing him, and the occasional cryptic remark. "Another one bites the dust, huh, Zion?" It didn't take long to piece together the pattern. He didn't just seduce women. He made a game of it, targeting the wives of powerful men and leaving destruction in his wake. But there was more. Rumors about a politician's wife. Whispers about the mayor's ex. A minor royal who'd ended up in a mental institution after her fling with Zion. He didn't just ruin marriages, he thrived on the chaos. And the worst part? He never paid for it. These men, these husbands, were too scared to fight back. They had too much to lose, too many reputations to protect. But me? I had nothing left. My reputation was already in tatters, my dignity dragging behind me like a broken kite. If anyone could take him down, it was me. I knew I couldn't go after him directly. Men like Zion didn't operate alone. He had his teammates, his entourage, his legal team. Even if I managed to confront him, what then? A fight? A few punches thrown in a parking lot? No, that wouldn't be enough. I needed something bigger. Something that would strip him of the power he thought he had. I started with surveillance. I installed more cameras around the house, not just for my alibi, but to watch Sandra too. It wasn't that I didn't believe she regretted what she'd done, though I wasn't convinced she didn't, but I needed to know she wouldn't slip back into old habits. Every move she made was recorded, every conversation monitored. It wasn't just about trust. It was about control. Then came the groundwork. I reached out to a few old friends, people I knew I could trust. One was a cop, the other a journalist. Both owed me favors. I fed them bits and pieces of what I'd learned about Zion, careful not to reveal too much. I wanted them interested but not suspicious. The journalist was especially eager, salivating at the idea of a story about a local hero with a dark side. I knew it would take time, but patience was something I had in abundance. Sandra, meanwhile, was none the wiser. She thought my late nights in the kitchen were spent brooding, and maybe I was. But I was also planning. Every tear she shed, every apology she whispered, only fueled my determination. She wanted to fix things? Fine. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook until I'd fixed the real problem, Zion. The first break came when my cop friend sent me a file. It wasn't much, just some traffic violations and noise complaints, but it was a start. What interested me most were the locations. Nightclubs, private parties, hotels. The man had a routine, a pattern. He liked to flaunt his conquests in public, to show off his trophies. It wasn't enough to take the wife. He had to humiliate the husband too. That's when the idea hit me. If Zion liked public displays, I'd give him one. But this time, he wouldn't be the one in control. This time, he'd be the one humiliated. I didn't know exactly how it would play out yet, but I knew where to start. The golf club. It was where he'd met Sandra, where the whole nightmare had begun. If there was one place I could get close to him, it was there. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was planning justice. For me, for Sandra, for every husband who'd ever been made to feel small by a man like Zionville. And if I had to burn a few bridges to make it happen, so be it. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about making sure he never did this to anyone else again. The golf club was where it had all started, and I knew it would be where everything began to unravel for Zionville. It wasn't just a place for golf. It was a breeding ground for gossip, power plays, and, as I'd learned the hard way, betrayal. Every time I thought about that night, Sandra in her red dress, Ville's hand on her waist as they danced, I felt my fists clench involuntarily. But this time, I wasn't walking into the lion's den as prey. This time, I was the one holding the leash. Stephen, one of the few people who'd stood by me, had convinced me to return to the club. "You can't hide forever, Dave," he'd said. "Show them you're not broken." Maybe he was right. Or maybe I just wanted to be there when Zion realized his reign was over. Sandra insisted on coming. "We need to show everyone that we're united," she said. United. A funny word coming from the woman who'd shattered my trust in the first place. But I let her come, partly because I wanted her to see what I was capable of, and partly because her presence would make the sting of what was about to happen even sharper for Zion. When we arrived, the air was thick with tension. Heads turned as we walked in, whispers following us like shadows. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd react. I didn't flinch. I held Sandra's hand, not out of affection, but because I knew it would make Zion burn when he saw it. And he did see it. He arrived fashionably late, as expected, his entourage trailing behind him like obedient puppies. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on us almost immediately. I saw the smirk curl across his face, the same smug expression that had haunted me since that night. He started walking toward us, and I felt Sandra's grip tighten on my hand. "Dave, let's just leave," she whispered. "He's not worth it." But he was. Oh, he was worth every second of what was about to unfold. "Evening north over," Zion said as he approached, his voice dripping with faux charm. "Back for more, are we? How about I borrow your wife for a dance? You know, just to relive old times." I could hear the murmurs ripple through the crowd. This was what he lived for. Humiliating other men, making them feel powerless. But not tonight. I stood my ground, staring him down. If you're looking for a dance partner, Vil, you'll have to settle for one of your lackeys. My wife's with me tonight. Sandra squeezed my hand, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually have my back. But Zion wasn't done. He leaned in closer, his smirk widening. Come on, Dave. We both know she's not really yours. She's just keeping the seat warm until someone better comes along. That was it. My blood boiled, and for a split second, I considered decking him right there. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment to lose control. Before I could respond, Stephen appeared at my side. Back off, Vil, he said, his voice firm. You've already done enough damage. Zion laughed, throwing his hands up in mock surrender. All right. No need to get protective. I'll leave the happy couple to their night. He walked away, but I could tell he wasn't done. He was waiting for his moment, just as I was waiting for mine. The night carried on, but the tension never left. Sandra stayed close to me, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I could tell she was terrified of what might happen. Good. She should be. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about us, about reclaiming what he'd taken from both of us. And then it happened. The confrontation I'd been waiting for. Zion, emboldened by a few too many drinks, approached us again. This time, he didn't bother with pleasantries. Let's settle this, Dave. Right here, right now. Or are you too scared to defend what's yours? The room went silent. All eyes were on us. This was his game, public humiliation, and he was a master at it. But he didn't know the rules had changed. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. I don't need to prove anything to you, Zion. But if you think you can keep pushing me, you're in for a rude awakening. Before he could respond, security intervened, pulling him back. The crowd erupted into whispers, their fascination shifting from me to him. He'd overplayed his hand, and now the tables were turning. As Zion was escorted out, I turned to Sandra. Her eyes were wide. A mix of fear and something else. Respect. Maybe. Sandra began her path to redemption the very next morning. I didn't know what she had planned, and honestly, I wasn't sure I cared. After the showdown at the golf club, part of me wanted to let her drown in her guilt. But another part, the part one didn't want to admit existed, was curious. Could she actually fix this? Could she undo the damage she'd done to me, to us, to our family? She started small. That morning, while I sat in the kitchen nursing my coffee and staring into the void, Sandra quietly placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. I made your favorite, she said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The gesture was nice, sure, but it didn't erase the image of her in that red dress, stepping out of Zion's car. Still, I ate the eggs. They were good, but I wouldn't tell her that. Later that day, she approached me with a hesitant look in her eyes. Dave, she began, I know I can't take back what I did, but I want to try to make things right. I'm going to do whatever it takes to show you that I'm sorry. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. And how exactly do you plan to do that? She hesitated, then said, by starting with the people I've hurt, our neighbors, our kids, you. I need to own what I've done, even if it humiliates me. Her words surprised me. Owning it? Humiliating herself? This was new. Sandra wasn't the kind of woman who liked to air her mistakes, let alone wear them on her sleeve. Part of me doubted she'd follow through, but another part wanted to see what she'd do. The next day, she began her apologies. It started at home, with the kids. She sat Sean and Carrie down and explained, in the simplest terms possible, that she'd made a mistake. Mommy hurt Daddy, she said, tears in her eyes. And I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused both of you. Sean, being older, understood more than I thought he would. So, you're not leaving us? He asked cautiously. Sandra pulled him into a hug, sobbing as she assured him she wasn't going anywhere. Carrie, meanwhile, climbed into my lap, her tiny arms wrapping around my neck. Don't be sad, Daddy, she whispered. We're still a family. Sandra didn't stop there. She made a list of every neighbor who'd been a witness to her walk of shame, every person whose whispers and side eyes had haunted me since that Sunday. One by one, she knocked on their doors. I didn't follow her, but I heard about it later. Some neighbors forgave her outright, saying it took courage to admit her mistakes. Others slammed the door in her face, their judgments as sharp as ever. And then there were the ones who laughed, mocking her as she stood there apologizing. One of those neighbors was the ice cream truck man. He'd been there that day, watching as she stepped out of Zion's car, and he hadn't let us forget it. When Sandra knocked on his door, he didn't even let her speak. "Too late," he barked. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." She came home that night, her face pale and her shoulders slumped. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she said, "I thought it would help, but it didn't. People still hate me." I wanted to tell her that I didn't care what the neighbors thought, that their judgment wasn't the problem. It was hers, her betrayal, her choice, her actions. But instead, I said, "It's not about them, Sandra. It's about us." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a spark of hope. "Then what can I do, Dave? Tell me. I'll do anything." I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what she could do to fix what she'd broken. But seeing her try, really try, was a start. Over the next few weeks, Sandra kept at it. She cleaned the house without me asking, made dinner every night, and even started joining me on my late-night runs. At first, I resented her for it. Running was my escape, my time to clear my head. But after a while, her presence became less intrusive. We didn't talk much during those runs, but the silence between us felt less hostile. It was almost peaceful. Then came the ultimate act of humility. One evening, Sandra announced she had something planned. "I want to show you how sorry I am," she said, her voice firm, "and I want to prove it in front of everyone." I had no idea what she meant until the sound of the ice cream truck echoed down our street. I stepped outside to see Sandra crawling on her hands and knees, wearing a makeshift sign that read, "I was wrong. Please forgive me." The neighbors were stunned. Some laughed, others gasped, and a few recorded the spectacle on their phones. I stood on the porch, torn between anger and pity as she made her way toward me. When she reached the steps, she looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dave," she said. "I mean it." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to pull her into my arms and say we'd figure it out. But another part of me, the part still scarred by her betrayal, hesitated. I reached out my hand and helped her to her feet. "We'll see," I said simply. The picnic was a turning point, though I didn't realize it at the time. That day in the park, watching Sean and Carrie laugh and play, something shifted in me. It wasn't a grand revelation or a flood of forgiveness, far from it. But for the first time since Sandra's betrayal, I saw a glimmer of what we could be, of what we used to be. A family. It was fragile, like a shard of glass teetering on the edge of a table, but it was there. Sandra took the picnic as a sign to keep trying, and she did so with relentless determination. Every day, she found new ways to show me that she was serious about repairing the damage. It wasn't just words anymore, it was actions. She started waking up early to make breakfast, not just for the kids but for me too. She took over more chores around the house, organizing spaces that had been neglected for years. One day, I found her cleaning the garage, something I'd been promising to do for months. She didn't say a word about it, just rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed, though I wasn't ready to acknowledge them out loud. Instead, I watched from a distance, waiting for signs that this was more than just guilt or desperation, waiting for proof that she was genuinely committed to fixing what she'd broken. The kids began to sense the change too. Sean, who had been so angry and confused, started opening up again. He'd come to me with his schoolwork or asked to throw the ball around in the yard. Carrie, ever the optimist, clung to Sandra with a kind of innocent trust that I envied. For them, the cracks in our family were beginning to mend. But for me, it wasn't that simple. Every time I looked at Sandra, I saw her stepping out of Zion's car. I saw the red dress, the smug smile, the humiliation. Forgiveness wasn't something I could summon overnight. It was a battle, a constant push and pull between anger and love, resentment, and hope. Then came the therapy sessions. At first, I went because I had no choice. Sandra had insisted, and for the sake of the kids, I'd agreed. But as the weeks went on, I found myself opening up more than I expected. Dr. Williams was good at his job, asking the right questions, challenging my assumptions without pushing too hard. He made me confront the pain head-on, and though it was uncomfortable, it was also cathartic. One session stood out. Dr. Williams asked, "Dave, what do you want from this marriage?" From Sandra? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Did I even know? I sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity before finally answering, "I want to trust her again, but I don't know if I can." Sandra, sitting beside me, reached for my hand. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me again." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. I wanted to believe her, but belief wasn't something I could force. It had to be earned. As the weeks turned into months, Sandra continued to show me that she was serious about change. She joined me on my late-night runs, even though she wasn't much of a runner. She started volunteering at Sean and Carrie's school, helping with events and fundraisers. She even reached out to the neighbors she'd humiliated herself in front of, offering genuine apologies and asking for forgiveness. One evening, she surprised me with something I hadn't expected. "Dave," she said, holding out a piece of paper, "I've signed us up for a couples retreat. I thought it might help us reconnect." "A retreat?" I asked skeptically. "Isn't that a little extreme?" "Maybe," she admitted, "but I think we need it. And I think it'll be good for us." I wanted to say no, to dismiss the idea as another one of her attempts to make things right. But something in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't just trying to fix our marriage. She was trying to fix herself. So I agreed. The retreat was intense, to say the least. We spent 3 days in a secluded cabin, attending workshops, participating in exercises, and having conversations we've been avoiding for months. It was uncomfortable, but it was also honest. For the first time, we talked about what had happened, really talked about it. I told her how much she'd hurt me, how much her actions had shattered my sense of self. And she listened. She didn't defend herself or make excuses. She just listened and apologized. By the end of the retreat, something had shifted. I wouldn't call it forgiveness, but it was a step in that direction. I saw Sandra not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as someone who was desperately trying to make amends. Someone who loved me and was willing to do whatever it took to prove it. When we returned home, things felt different, lighter, somehow. Sandra continued her efforts, but now they felt less like penance and more like genuine attempts to rebuild our life together. The kids noticed the change too, and their laughter began to fill the house again. One night, as we sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed, Sandra turned to me. "Dave," she said softly, "thank you for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I won't let you down." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached for her hand and squeezed it. It wasn't much, but it was the closest I'd come to forgiveness. And in that moment, it was enough. The path to healing wasn't linear. There were still moments of anger, flashes of doubt. But with every step we took, I began to see the possibility of a future. Not the one we'd lost, but a new one. A stronger one. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope.